Welcome back, viewers. You're watching WION The World is One. This is World DNA, the show that gets you ahead of the rest. I'm Shivan Jonna.
And I'm Him Kaur, and on the show today, at the UNGA, Ukrainian President Zelensky has accused Russia of plotting potentially catastrophic attacks on Ukrainian nuclear plants. This as he tries to rally support for Ukraine. The United States, on the other hand, has promised new military aid. We'll bring you all the updates on this and more on the show today.
Also on World DNA, on to the other war front. Calls for a restraint are growing as Israel continues to intensify its attacks on Hezbollah based in Lebanon. Israeli Army Chief Herzi Halevi told IDF troops to be prepared for a possible ground offensive in Lebanon as well. We tell you all that you need to know right here on World DNA. Let's get you started with the headlines.
Israeli army chief tells troops to be ready for possible entry into Lebanon, signaling a possible ground offensive against Hezbollah. Lebanon says at least 72 killed, more than 400 injured on the third day of major Israeli strikes across the country.
The United States, European Union and several Arab nations issue a joint call for temporary ceasefire in Lebanon after France unveils proposal for a 21-day ceasefire at the United Nations.
President Biden says the United States will announce actions to accelerate support for Ukraine today as Ukrainian President Zelensky claims Russia is planning to attack nuclear power plants in his country.
US Congress approves a deal to avoid a government shutdown. Lawmakers send a stopgap funding deal to President Joe Biden's desk that will keep the lights on through the US elections.
Heavy rains lash the city of Mumbai and surrounding areas. Weather Department issues red alert for India's financial capital and neighbouring districts.
Diogo Jota and Cody Gakpo scored 2 goals each as Liverpool begin their EFL Cup title defence by coming from behind to thrash West Ham at Anfield.
Our top story on World DNA this morning, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has accused Russia of plotting potentially catastrophic attacks on Ukrainian nuclear plants.
But in his address to world leaders at the UNGA, Zelensky said that Moscow is planning attacks on Kiev's nuclear power plants and infrastructure, aiming to disconnect the plants from the power grid. Zelensky added that any missile or drone strike or any critical incident in the energy system could lead to a nuclear disaster, warning that a day like that must never come.
Recently, I received yet another alarming report from our intelligence. Now, Putin does seem to be planning attacks on our nuclear power plants and their infrastructure, aiming to disconnect the plants from the power grid. With the help of satellites, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, satellites of other countries. Russia is getting images and detailed information about the infrastructure of our nuclear power plants.
Shortly after the Ukrainian president's remarks, his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin made his most explicit threat yet over the use of nuclear weapons, saying Russia would consider such a response to a massive air attack on its soil.
The updated version of the document proposes that the aggression against Russia by any non-nuclear weapon state, but with the participation or support of a nuclear weapon state, should be regarded as a joint attack on the Russian Federation. The conditions for Russia's transition to the use of nuclear weapons are also clearly defined. We will consider such a possibility as soon as we receive reliable information about a massive launch of aerospace attack means and their crossing of our state border.
Ukraine has been pushing the United States and its allies to ease restrictions on weapons that can be used to strike deeper inside Russia. Soon after Zelensky's UN address, President Joe Biden's administration promised new military aid for Ukraine.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has announced $375 million in military aid for Ukraine. This package includes HIMARS precision rocket launchers, cluster munitions and light tactical vehicles, assuring that the United States is committed to Ukraine's defense against what he called Russia's brutal aggression. Blinken said that Washington would deploy this new assistance as quickly as possible.
This is likely to be the last such visit before the November elections in the US that could shape Washington's policy on Kiev. Zelensky is set to soon meet President Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, and he will present his victory plan.
The aid package comes as Ukraine frets that a second Donald Trump presidency could loosen the United States' commitment. Trump has repeatedly praised Russian President Vladimir Putin and has refused to take a side in this war. As Kyiv seeks to cover all political bases, Zelensky plans to meet the former president during his visit as well. For more on this, we're now being joined by Charles Kupchan from Sarajevo. He is a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. He's also the former special assistant to the President and Senior Director for European Affairs on the state of the National Security Council in the Barack Obama administration. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on World DNA. It's a pleasure to have you. Now, sir, we've been hearing about this victory plan for quite some time. Now, Zelensky is trying to cover all bases. What I want to understand is, what do you think a victory plan would entail?
Well, we don't really know yet. Zelensky has been talking about this so-called plan for almost a month now, but he is waiting to expose the details until he meets with President Biden in Washington tomorrow on Thursday, Washington time. From what we can gather, Zelensky is going to ask for permission to take deep strikes on Russian territory using U.S.-provided weapons. He's going to ask for more economic and military assistance. He appears to be ready to ask for some kind of formal commitment to be invited to join NATO, Ukrainian membership in NATO. Whether there is also some kind of proposal to move to diplomacy, to directly engage Russia in a dialogue, we don't know. He did say after the last peace summit in Switzerland that he wanted Russia to participate in the next one. But whether he actually has a concrete plan for engaging Russia at this point remains unclear. We may know more after the meeting with Biden.
Mr. Kupchan, now certain reports suggest that Trump has declined to meet with Zelensky to discuss Ukraine's victory plan. And now, do you feel this is like this last-ditch effort by Zelensky to gain as much support while Biden is in office?
Well, I think a couple things are going on. One is that Zelensky wants to keep open a channel of communication with Trump and Trump's team, because obviously nobody knows who's going to be the next president of the United States. And Zelensky knows that the glide path here in the United States, and in Europe for that matter, when it comes to the future provision of aid, is not as assured as it's been in the past. This last aid package put 7 months to get approval in the U.S. House. Republicans are generally opposed to large aid packages for Ukraine. So I think he's trying to rally support in the American public, because there will be a new ask for assistance, probably late this year or early next year. And he's trying to get as much as he can out of Joe Biden, because he knows that Joe Biden is a very, very strong supporter of Ukraine. And maybe this is a last chance to get in certain kinds of assistance and perhaps approval to hit Russian territory with long-range weapons.
Right, sir. I also want to understand, as per Zelensky, Russia can be pushed into diplomatic peace if the West strengthens Ukraine's position. Do you feel a show of strength is the way to go forward and to achieve peace with a country like Russia?
I think it's the only way forward. We don't know what Putin's war aims are, but I think it's safe to say that he ultimately would like to topple the government, turn Ukraine into a failed state, turn Ukraine into a subjugated state. And the best way to tell him that that's not going to happen is to make sure that Ukraine has what it needs to protect itself. I think that the term victory plan is probably a misnomer in the sense that I'm guessing what's going on behind the scenes is to put Ukraine in as best a position as possible to block any further Russian advances, make it clear to Putin that he's not going to get any further. And then at that time, that's when you try to negotiate a ceasefire, when you have maximum negotiating leverage in Kyiv.
All right, we hear you, Mr. Kapchan. Thank you so much for joining us right here on World DNA. It's always a pleasure hearing your thoughts on current issues.
Good to be with you.
Now, chances of a de-escalation in the other war front, that's West Asia, those continue to be evasive. In the latest, Israeli Army Chief Herzi Halevi told IDF troops to be prepared for a possible ground offensive in Lebanon.
But this is as Israel continues to intensify strikes on Hezbollah. Listen to this.
You hear the jets overhead. We have been striking all day. This is both to prepare the ground for your possible entry and to continue degrading Hezbollah. Today, Hezbollah expanded its range of fire, and later today, they will receive a very strong response. Prepare yourselves.
The IDF has claimed to have struck over 2,000 Hezbollah locations, including 60 suspected intelligence sites, weapons depots and rocket launcher sites in retaliation since Monday. 2 reserve brigades of the army have been moved to the northern front of Israel as well.
In anticipation of a potential ground operation, the Israeli Air Force, it's also claimed to have targeted around 280 Hezbollah sites across Lebanon on Wednesday.
Now, at the same time, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to continue aerial strikes on Lebanon with no go-ahead on IDF ground operations in Lebanon as of yet. Netanyahu has stated that the IDF will continue engaging Hezbollah up until the safe return of Israelis displaced from the north by their attacks, if possible.
Now, this as Hezbollah and nexus of allied Iran-backed groups continue to strike settlements across North Israel. In the latest, the Israeli port of Eilat was struck by a supposed drone, leaving 2 injured. The responsibility of the attack has been claimed by the umbrella group for Iranian-backed militias from Iraq. According to the IDF, a second drone was intercepted and downed. Both drones were observed to have approached from the east. Footage aired on Israeli media showed a plume of smoke and at least 1 damaged building.
Hezbollah has claimed to have launched rocket attacks on several Israeli towns, including Safed and Nahariya. Hezbollah says it targeted both Israeli towns and army bases.
It earlier said that it had targeted Israel's Mossad spy agency headquarters in Tel Aviv's outskirts. The first time it has fired a ballistic missile in almost a year of cross-border clashes sparked by the Gaza war.
Now, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry, Israeli strikes on Wednesday killed 72 people and injured 400, bringing the death toll now to over 600 since the strikes began earlier this week.
The fighting has also led to a mass exodus in Lebanon, with people fleeing from Israeli bombardment as the conflict intensifies. The UN reports a staggering 90,000 people have been displaced in Lebanon this week.
Meanwhile, Iran has warned that Tehran will back Lebanon by all means if Israel escalates its offensive against Hezbollah.
Iran has already shown tremendous patience and restraint for the sake of regional peace and stability. Iran firmly upholds its inherent right to defend its vital interests. And finally, Iran will not remain indifferent in case of a full-scale war in Lebanon. We stand with the people of Lebanon with all means.
As tensions in West Asia escalate, world leaders gathered in New York for the United Nations General Assembly, and they've called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and Lebanon.
Now, in the latest, France and the United States, they're working to hammer out a 21-day ceasefire proposal between Hezbollah and Israel.
French Foreign Minister Jean-Noel Barrot further urged both the sides to engage on a path of de-escalation and said that Paris had worked with the parties in defining the parameters for a diplomatic solution.
La guerre n'est pas inéluctable.
War is not inevitable. A diplomatic solution is possible. In recent days, we have worked with our American partners on a temporary ceasefire platform to enable negotiations. This platform will be made public very soon, and we are counting on both parties to accept it without delay.
Cette plateforme va être rendue publique très rapidement et nous comptons sur les deux parties pour l'accès.
Now, while addressing the UNGA, French President Emmanuel Macron called for an end to Israeli escalation and Hezbollah rocket fire.
Et dans l'immédiat, au moment où nous nous parlons,
we cannot have a war in Lebanon. There cannot be a war in Lebanon. This is why we urge Israel to cease this escalation in Lebanon and to Hezbollah to cease this missile launch to Israel. We urge all of those who provide them with the means to do so to stop doing so.
Israël, quant à lui, ne peut sans conséquence étendre ses opérations au Liban.
Echoing similar concerns, UN Chief Antonio Guterres said that hell is breaking loose in Lebanon and that diplomatic efforts have intensified to achieve a temporary ceasefire.
Madam President, Excellencies, hell is breaking loose in Lebanon. As I told the General Assembly yesterday, we should all be alarmed by the escalation. Lebanon is at the brink.
US President Joe Biden further warned of the possibility of an all-out war, but said that he was hopeful a settlement was still achievable for the conflict-torn region.
Meanwhile, addressing the UNGA, Israel's UN envoy said that Tel Aviv was open to diplomatic solutions on Lebanon, but vowed to use all means in its goal to degrade Hezbollah.
Do not mistake a peaceful nation for a defenseless one. We have the means, we have the capabilities to achieve this goal. If diplomacy fails to return our residents to their homes, then we will use all means at our disposal in accordance with international law to achieve our aims.
Speaking before an emergency meeting of the Security Council in New York, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken emphasized that he would prefer a diplomatic solution and outlined that Israel has the legitimate interest in seeking to remove Hezbollah from the borders of northern Israel.
Meanwhile, Pope Francis, in his weekly audience at the Vatican on Wednesday, expressed his closeness to the Lebanese people, decrying the escalation of violence in the region as unacceptable.
I'm saddened by the news coming from Lebanon, where intense bombing in recent days has caused much death and destruction. I hope that the international community will make every effort to stop this terrible escalation. It is unacceptable. I express my closeness to the Lebanese people who have already suffered too much in the recent past.
Now, word of Russia deepening ties with Yemen's Houthis is increasingly coming to the fore.
Sources are saying that Iran is brokering ongoing secret talks on Russia transferring advanced anti-ship missiles to the militant group based in Yemen.
Now, reports say delegations of Houthis and Russians met in Tehran twice this year. Talks to provide dozens of missiles with a range of over 300 kilometers are said to be ongoing. Further meetings are expected in coming weeks.
Reports suggest that Russia is to decide soon on transferring Russian Yakhon missiles to the Houthis. The P-800 Onyx missiles, as they are also called, would allow more accurate targeting of commercial vessels in the Red Sea. The threat to US and European warships rises sharply with this development, with experts saying that the move would be a game changer for regional security.
Now, Washington is known to have raised the issue with Moscow. Officials from the United States and Saudi Arabia also took it up when they met in Riyadh earlier this year. The senior US official warned of dire consequences if the transfer takes place, saying there is alarm that Russian missiles would enable Houthis to cause more damage.
Now, on its part, the Kremlin is motivated to collaborate with the Houthis amid what it sees as possibilities that some Western countries could decide to allow Ukraine to use their weapons to strike further into Russian territory. This is as per certain reports. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin had warned in June that Moscow could send advanced long-range weapons to the West's adversaries around the world.
Now, the US Army's Pacific Command in its latest report has observed a continued deployment of PLA forces on the line of actual control with India.
The report suggested that China's long-standing border dispute with its neighbor reflects regional tensions on world's longest unmarked border between India and China. It said the People's Liberation Army is working to improve combat readiness and interoperability and is constantly upgrading the methods as well as standards of training combined arms maneuver. The report reflected that PLA prioritized integrating training with joint forces and logistics, including executing multiple large-scale exercises, while sustaining deployments to the line of actual control with India.
It also briefly talked about the PLA's internal security forces such as the People's Armed Force Police and a joint logistics support force, which were bolstering joint interoperability with PLA for rapid response, mobility and counter-terror operations.
Mentioning the deadly 2020 skirmish between India and China, the report read that PLA had deployed rotational forces along the line of actual control, while it reinforced military activities, facilities and infrastructure in a bid to support additional deployments if needed.
The report also mentioned the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor and added that the introduction of CPEC was meant to reduce China's dependence on the Malacca Strait as well as Indian Ocean for maritime shipping. It also highlighted that China was actively working to secure overseas interests and bolster its control over global grain, energy, national resources and industrial supply chains.
Contrary to this report, however, China's ambassador to India, Xu Feihong, on Tuesday termed the border dispute between the two countries as a minor difference.
Now, he said that it was normal for two neighbors to have differences and that it was important to know how these differences were viewed and handled. He also said that both countries had the wisdom and the capability to handle these differences to find a mutually acceptable solution.
Speaking at an event celebrating the 75th founding of the People's Republic of China, Xu Feihong went on to say that Prime Minister Modi and President Xi Jinping reached a consensus that India and China were partners and not rivals. He clarified that both leaders had a reciprocal understanding of each other's development, strategic intentions and core interests.
India and China's tense relationship became worse in 2020 when both militaries engaged in a standoff which later led to a deadly skirmish. A slow but steady rapprochement in ties has continued over the years, which still requires both sides to completely disengage from various friction points.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau passed a major litmus test as his minority Liberal government survived a motion of no confidence declared by the opposition Conservative Party.
Legislators voted 211 to 120 against the Conservative Party's no confidence motion on Tuesday. Senior Liberal Party leaders hailed the decision of the House of Commons.
What I can say is that I think today was a good day for the country, because I don't think Canadians want an election. What they want to see is politicians, legislatures working together and working for Canadians. And we saw that 3 parties in the House can do that. There's only one party that can't, it's the Conservatives, and it's because it's all about their own personal political ambition and it's not about Canadians.
The voting comes after a heated debate which saw Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre accusing Trudeau of failing to address Canada's surging cost of living, housing crisis and rising crime rates. He added that the country is struggling under the Liberal government's mismanagement for 9 years.
Olivier has been pushing for a snap election since the New Democratic Party, that's the NDP, broke away from the coalition agreement with the Liberals. That eventually weakened Trudeau administration. However, after the Liberals won the no-confidence vote in, the NDP has once again realigned itself with Trudeau's government.
Trudeau's popularity has been waning off late. According to opinion polls, the Conservative Party is in the lead with 43% against 21% for the Liberals and 19% for the NDP. Though the Liberals have won the no-confidence vote, Trudeau's government is facing several roadblocks ahead in the coming week. The Liberals will now have their tasks cut out to survive a second vote, which will be on one of its budgetary measures. The separatist bloc has also vowed to topple Trudeau's government if they do not heed to their demands.
I think what we're seeing today is that, this House does not have confidence in the G leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. And that is something that, what we hear from the opposition parties is just how bad he would be for Canada. So we'll take it day by day, but, I'm going to continue to work with the other parties and work for Canadians.
And with that, it's time now for a short break.
Don't go anywhere. This is World DNA. Of course, lots more lined up for you on the other side. We bring you more reports coming in from Sri Lanka, where the newly elected President Anura Kumara Dissanayake made his first address to the nation, saying that his priority lies in stabilizing the country's economy.
And India's weather department has issued a red alert for Mumbai and its neighbouring districts after heavy rain lashed the city and surrounding areas. We'll get you all the updates on this on the other side.
From the bustling trading floors of Wall Street to the vibrant exchanges of Asian stock markets, WION breaks it down for you to make sense of what's happening, as we reveal the key factors behind events, strategic battles, and the game-changing business decisions that shape the world. We bring you all of this and more on World Business Watch.
To bring the benefits of the Subhash Chandra Show to your educational institution, teachers and students, send an invitation to Juhi Jha at juhi@such.org.in.
WION, India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide, because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION, World is One.
Everyone loves a contest. But sport isn't just about victory and defeat. When the GOATs in sport speak, you hear it first on WION.
You have to play good cricket over a period of time.
I should push myself right out of the damn tournament.
We go beyond the stats. Our stories are quoted the world over.
At WION, sport is part of our DNA. Come, join us on this journey. Weekdays 6:30 p.m. IST, 1 p.m. GMT.
The Earth is sending distress signals. Wildfires, droughts, and melting glaciers. Can we reverse the damage? Explore the harrowing effects of climate change. It's a wake-up call. Global emergency. Climate Tracker on WION World is One.
Welcome back, viewers. You're watching World DNA with him, and I'm Shivan. Lots lined up for you on this side of the show as well. Let's get you started with the headlines.
More than 57% voter turnout recorded for the second phase of the Jammu and Kashmir Assembly elections for 26 seats across 6 districts.
Israeli army chief tells troops to be ready for possible entry into Lebanon, signaling a possible ground offensive against Hezbollah. Lebanon says at least 72 killed and more than 400 injured on the third day of major Israeli strikes across the country.
The United States, European Union and several Arab nations issue a joint call for temporary ceasefire in Lebanon. Lebanon's Prime Minister welcomes the French-US proposal for a 21-day ceasefire.
President Biden says the United States will announce actions to accelerate support for Ukraine today, as Ukrainian President Zelensky claims Russia is planning to attack nuclear power plants in his country.
New York City Mayor Eric Adams indicted after federal corruption investigation. Reports say indictment comes after resignations of top officials, including the police commissioner and school's chancellor.
Robert Lewandowski scores his 7th league goal of the season as leaders Barcelona beat Getafe to continue their perfect start in La Liga. Sri Lanka's newly elected President Anura Kumara Dissanayake made his first address to the nation. The left-leaning president says his priority lies in stabilizing the country's economy.
Right, and the president called on the nation to restart talks with the IMF over a $2.9 billion bailout that threw a lifeline to the bankrupt country.
Dissanayake in his speech said he welcomed everyone involved in building the new age Sri Lanka. The president also appointed governors for 9 provinces in the country. The South Asian nation heads to parliamentary polls in the next 50 days on the 14th of November. The president has dissolved the current parliament and called for snap elections. The aim behind the move is for the new leader to follow up on his electoral promise of bringing change in Sri Lanka's decades-old rule by political families.
The South Asian nation, which voted for Anura Kumara Dissanayake, is looking to recover from its worst ever economic crisis. Millions of Sri Lankans had taken to the streets in 2020 in protest against then-President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. Thousands had stormed the presidential palace in Colombo as Rajapaksa fled the nation at the time. Last week, Sri Lanka held elections for the first time since the economic crisis, and millions voted for change. And as Sri Lanka grapples with an economic crisis, the newly elected president Anura Kumara Dissanayake is taking decisive steps to reshape the country's financial future.
Well, in a televised address, President Dissanayake called for immediate talks with the IMF regarding a crucial $2.9 billion bailout. Now, this package was a lifeline for Sri Lanka, helping to alleviate severe shortages of food, fuel and medicine that plagued the country during its financial meltdown.
While the bailout helped stabilize the economy and returned it to growth, it also imposed painful austerity measures that have left many citizens struggling to make ends meet. Dissanayake, who identifies as a Marxist, won the presidency promising to reverse unpopular tax hikes and increase public servants' salaries. His victory was marked by a significant margin, securing over 1.2 million votes, more than his nearest rival, which signals a strong public desire for change. Anura Kumara Dissanayike's promises to voters includes cutting down the number of MPs.
Disengagement had promised that the first cabinet decision will be to cancel MPs' pensions. MPs get vehicle permits which are sold for 20 to 30 million rupees. Remember, they don't buy a vehicle with that permit. They take a vehicle from the government for their use and then sell the permit. The NPP government will stop issuing permits to MPs, which is a bribe, he said. There will be no motorcades of 7-8 vehicles to travel behind ministers, maximum 1 or 2. Isn't that good? He asked. Let's begin. Well, he also added, and again I quote, this poor country cannot bear the cost of maintaining these MPs and ministers, quote unquote.
In a symbolic gesture of change, reports have surfaced of hundreds of state-owned vehicles abandoned around the capital. These vehicles, including luxury SUVs, were reportedly left by former officials, prompting the Disengagement administration to launch an investigation into their disappearance.
Not that they stopped on their own, but after our comrade Disengagement became president, these vehicles came to a stop. There is a reason for this. This shows how public property has been abused. This is how public property was used. If Disengagement did not win the presidency, these vehicles would be running on the roads even today. Even today, they will run with fuel obtained from public funds, from people's taxes.
The economic situation is dire. In March 2020, a ban on vehicle imports was enacted amid a foreign exchange crisis, making cars prohibitively expensive. A 10-year-old Toyota SUV now costs around $150,000, while a 5-year-old Range Rover can exceed $300,000. The backdrop of Disengagement's rise to power includes months of public protests that culminated in the storming of the presidential palace in July 2022. Now, this unrest ultimately led to the resignation of former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, highlighting the urgent demand for change among the populace.
Disengagement, in his new plans, aims to restructure outstanding loans and negotiate better terms for debt relief. He emphasized the need to expedite these negotiations with creditors to support the country's financial recovery. The IMF has expressed readiness to engage with the new administration, emphasizing a desire to build on the gains made under the current bailout program. However, analysts warn that the IMF is unlikely to shift its core conditions, which include restrictions on money printing and strict revenue targets.
As President Disengagement moves forward with his agenda, the questions remain. Will his administration be able to negotiate better terms with the IMF?
And how quickly can the government implement measures that truly benefit the people? The answer to these questions will determine the economic landscape for millions of Sri Lankans in the months ahead.
All right, we move further from here. Chinese central banker Pan Gongsheng unleashed one of China's most daring policy campaigns in decades.
However, economists say the adrenaline shot is only buying China a little time. Economists believe the stimulus blitz is just a down payment. They say in addition to the latest measures, China needs reforms to reconfigure the economy and unleash consumption growth fundamentally. Take a look at our next report for more on this.
At a rare high-level press conference in Beijing on Tuesday, the governor of the People's Bank of China and other senior financial officials finally delivered the easing measures that market watchers had been hoping for weeks. This is like a huge shot of adrenaline for an economy on the verge of a deflationary spiral. Lower lending rates, increased funding for banks, larger home buyers' incentives, and the possibility of a stock stabilization fund are all on the table. The mainland and Hong Kong stock markets rose sharply, with the CSI 300 index reaching its highest level since July 2020. Sectors with significant exposure to China, such as the automotive and luxury goods industries, drove advances in US and European benchmarks. According to the market's reaction to the policy blitz, the measures have brought the Chinese economy some much-needed breathing room. However, economists believe this is simply a down payment. The $18 trillion economy is facing a prolonged property market recession, deflation, and escalating global trade tensions. In addition to the massive stimulus package, President Xi Jinping will need to address these issues with more long-term structural reforms. Duncan Riley, chief China economist with Pantheon Macroeconomics, said, "I don't think it's enough to address the underlying issues behind China's movement towards deflationary spiral." Wrigley added, What China needs is a package of reforms to fundamentally reconfigure the economy and unleash consumption growth. For the time being, the narrative around China's economy has been altered by Pan and other leaders. This is a significant change. UBS Group and Goldman Sachs Group both lowered their predictions for China's economic growth in the past few weeks. This was in response to a deluge of negative data that sounded the alarm about declining prices. Bloomberg Economics and others now expect the government to hit Xi's goal of around 5% growth this year. But most economists also agree that more is needed to avoid entrenched Japan-style deflation. Nigel Pay, a portfolio manager at Timefolio Asset Management, said, "A lot of China's issues are demand or confidence-driven." He added, "Overall, I don't think the measures can move the needle as China's problems are complex, and there's no silver bullet." With the central bank surprising the market by doing more than expected, the spotlight now is on the Ministry of Finance. More fiscal measures could come in the next few days as Xi's 24-member Politburo is set to meet ahead of a week-long annual holiday starting Tuesday. The event will mark the 75th anniversary since the Communist Party founded the People's Republic of China. For now, though, the big missing piece remains a coherent strategy to get China's 1.4 billion people to ramp up spending. Business Bureau report, WION World is One.
Now, India's weather department, it's issued a red alert for Mumbai and its neighbouring districts after heavy rain lashed the city and the surrounding areas.
Flooded roads, traffic jams and flight diversions have all made the city come to a halt. Vehicles were moving at snail's pace while people waded through knee-deep water as Mumbai's infrastructure struggled under the deluge.
Now, flight diversions have also added to the chaos. Several airlines have been forced to divert flights due to poor weather. The local rail services, called the lifeline of India's financial capital, were also hit hard by the unrelenting rains.
Cities' suburban areas were worst hit by the torrential rains, with low-lying areas going underwater. The Indian Meteorological Department issued a red alert for Mumbai and neighbouring districts, predicting extremely heavy rainfall through Thursday. Mumbai's municipal agency has announced a holiday for schools and colleges on Thursday. Residents have been advised to try and stay at home. The torrential rains are brought by a trough stretching from Konkan to Bangladesh.
All right, for more on this, we're now being joined by principal correspondent Disha Shah on the phone line. Disha, thank you so much for joining us. What can you tell us about the situation right now?
Well, right now the situation is that post midnight yesterday, we haven't received rains in the city of Mumbai and its surrounding areas. However, the weather department has issued an orange alert for Mumbai today. The red alert has been issued till 8:30 in the morning. And keeping in mind that how the heavy rain lashed Mumbai and the surrounding areas yesterday, the IMD had issued a red alert till today morning, 8:30 a.m. And we have seen yesterday that for at least about 6 to 7 hours, the Mumbai recorded over 200 mm within 5 hours. So that's most of the areas were affected. We saw flooding on the low-lying areas. We've also seen 14 flights were diverted until 10 p.m. and 7 flights had to make a go-around at Mumbai airport due to the bad weather. The lifeline of Mumbai, the local services were also impacted for a brief period. But the situation became a little bit normal after 10 p.m. according to the authorities here in concern. And right now the situation is that the city is not receiving rains that like we saw yesterday. But yes, due to the weather department's advisory and alert, the schools and colleges have been declared holiday today in Mumbai, Thane, as well as in Pune, the metro cities, for the safety of the students. And the authorities have also appealed to people to not step out until it's necessary.
Thanks, Disha, for getting us the latest. Of course, the visuals seem extremely concerning, but as you mentioned, there has not been further rain after midnight last night. So here's hoping things resume to normalcy at the earliest. All right, next up, we are going to bring you a glimpse of all that's happening in the world of technology.
Vienna-based advocacy group NOYB filed a complaint with the Austrian Data Protection Authority against Mozilla. There are accusations that the Firefox browser maker is tracking user behavior on websites without their consent. It's reported that Mozilla has enabled so-called privacy-preserving attribution feature that turns the browser into a tracking tool for websites without directly telling its users. While this may be less invasive than unlimited tracking, it still interferes with user rights under the EU's privacy laws.
Italy's antitrust agency has launched an investigation into a Dublin-based company that manages the Italian website of online clothing retailer Shein. Why? Because there are possible misleading environmental claims on the site. There are accusations that the company is trying to convey an image of production and commercial sustainability through generic, vague and misleading environmental claims. There is more, of course. Their website appears to emphasize a commitment to decarbonization. It, however, seems to be contradicted by the increase in greenhouse gas emissions shown in Shein's sustainability reports for 2022 and 2023.
Japanese firm Nintendo will next week open a museum where it will showcase its history. Fans of Super Mario, The Legend of Zelda and the Game Boy and Switch can gain insight into one of the world's most renowned game makers located in Uji, near the company's Kyoto headquarters. The museum underscores the many evolutions of Nintendo, which was founded in 1889 as a maker of Hanafuda playing cards. In addition to iconic devices, visitors will also be able to see lesser-known products. The museum also offers a range of interactive experiences. For instance, visitors can play the video game Super Mario Bros. On a single oversized family computer controller.